Parkour is pretty cool. Being able to flip, jump, and or slide across obstacles will always be visually appealing. As such, it would make sense for it to make it into video games. For most third-person games, parkour isn't really the main focus, and it's more just for adding flair for the movement. Then there's some that even take place in first person, like Mirror's Edge. That only leaves 2D. There are a handful of games that could be considered 2D parkour games, but there's no denying that the one to successfully and beautifully implement parkour into a 2D runner was the iconic mobile game Vector. Vector was a game that redefined and raised the bar for side-scrolling mobile games during its debut. You, the viewer, probably played it or at the very least heard of Vector, as it stood out from the puzzle games that flooded the market at that time, and its near-accurate parkour moves were so realistic that many believed the game was developed using mocap. But in actuality, the developers simply used references from real life, then carefully animated it to mimic the style almost seamlessly. Paired together with its minimalist design and amazing environmental storytelling, it quickly shot up into mobile gaming royalty, with its sequel Vector 2 only being released just 4 years after. So you would think that a game this great, its sequel should be even better. However, this isn't the case. As compared to the original, it isn't even close, and it failed so badly that it had to be removed from the App Store by its own developers. So hold on, you might be thinking, how exactly did its sequel fail? It practically has the same mechanics but with more features. Well, if you've been following my channel for a while, you'd know that when I cover games that were removed, it was always the result of unfortunate circumstances, with many of its remaining fans still fondly remembering the time when it was still around. This is actually the first time where it's the complete opposite. Vector 2's removal wasn't due to internal conflicts, but rather being mediocre at best.
Mediocre?
But I'm getting ahead of myself. To get the full picture, we first need to understand what made the original so beloved, and how the sequel completely missed the point of what it stood for. Starting with, of course, the developers Nekki. Nekki Studio is a Russian-based developer most notable for their games like Vector and the iconic Shadow Fight series. Both are games that use silhouettes for their characters and backgrounds while using very realistic movement rather than the traditional cartoonish animation. Based on their old YouTube channel, how it's done is by using real life references, then animating it as close as possible. Sure, it might be more tedious to do, but it pays off as it's what both Vector and the Shadow Fight series would be most known for. Vector also had an amazing atmosphere and premise. You start off as an unnamed protagonist trapped inside a corporate office with countless other workers just like you. The only dialogue in the entire game comes from an ominous figure who is lulling everyone to a false sense of security by promising safety and comfort. You are the only one who sees through the lies and eventually breaks free from their control and tries to escape, using your apparent parkour skills and inhuman stamina to evade any obstacles and the dozens of guards that are constantly on your back. The game follows the show don't tell trope as there's no dialogue boxes, audio logs, text entries, or anything else to explain the world he's in, and it helps sell the mystery. When does it take place? You start off in a normal city, but eventually you find out there's flying cars and moving sidewalks. Who are the guards chasing you? Are they from the corporate office you work at, or from some authority much greater? It makes you wonder if you're even in reality or inside the Matrix. And you're not the only one, as soon you'll encounter a few like Vector who are trying to escape. So with no answers and only more questions as you keep running towards uncertain freedom, it keeps you at the edge of your seat wondering what will happen next. Then we have Vector 2. So, quick disclaimer before I go over this part, I personally never played the game, only the original, so I never really got to experience it, but after my research led to me watching a 4-hour long video of gameplay to find anything good about it, I'm kind of glad I didn't. I also know that some people genuinely enjoyed the game, so I'll try to make it as fair as possible. The parkour in Vector 2 is about the same, but this time with a few new moves added, and now there's a complete soundtrack to run with. In the original, there was only one track that was really good and got the job done, but with these new tracks playing for each stage, it adds a little bit more variety, not to mention it's just really awesome in general. The story also starts off strong. It takes place several years after Vector's capture from the first game. He is awakened to test his skills and abilities inside a gigantic underground lab. this time with a lot of deadly traps and obstacles, and if he manages to die, a clone will simply take his place. As all hope seems lost for him, an unknown person from the outside hacked into the system and is trying to get Vector out. That's pretty much all the good stuff. It only goes downhill from here. In Vector 2, there's a ton, and I mean a ton, of exposition. Instead of letting players figure out the story, there's now dialogue boxes after completing certain floors, either from the scientist you're forced to work with, or the hacker from the outside who's trying to help. You can also find audio logs scattered throughout which contain important lore drops. I actually quite like this as it allows players to learn a bit more of the world of Vector that was left vague in the previous game, but it could have been done better. Instead of having Vector find some kind of disk or USB drive containing these logs, how you actually get them is just by picking up these squares like they're floating coins from Mario, which to be fair was basically what the original was too, but hey. And while the clone thing might have been a cool idea on paper, it removes any tension the game could have had, and the overall goal. Like the whole point of Vector is he's a guy trying to escape the system, flung into a world completely unknown to him, while being pursued by the ones trying to drag him back. In the first few seconds alone, we can already relate to Vector's longing for freedom, and it makes us invested in his world, which gives us both a sense of urgency and uncertainty during the entire game. Meanwhile in 2 it's like, oh, it appears I have perished, fret not, for I shall merely respawn and try again. And to be honest, with how it's an underground facility with the protagonist being able to respawn and doing a bunch of tests that involve futuristic obstacles, I am convinced that Nekki was trying to do a Portal 2. But these are mostly just minor compared to the biggest and probably the main reason that caused the game to fail. It was the grind. Video game grinding in general is a mixed bag. Some games can do it well, while others will have you uninstall right away. To put it into context, one of my favorite games from Nekki was Shadow Fight 2, which was perfect in almost every way except it was heavily monetized with the armor and weapons taking forever to upgrade without premium currency, so that would usually bring any story progress to a complete halt. While this isn't in Vector 2, it's still somehow a bit worse. First, if you manage to die, you respawn at certain checkpoints, which can be frustrating for reason number 2, the facility is boring as heck. In Vector 1 there were 3 distinct maps, and the coolest part was how the obstacles made sense, and the stages themselves represented the difficulty. Downtown had you running on rooftops, which meant occasionally running into offices that had tables and chairs, seeing the papers fly after jumping over a table, or birds flying away when you get near them, helps make the world feel alive. And since it was mostly basic platforms, it was perfect for players to get used to the game. And then in the construction yard level, there's construction related obstacles along with smaller platforms, meaning it required precise jumps to get past. And finally, in Technology Park, there's a lot of advanced machinery that turned into moving platforms which required players to think fast and react accordingly. While in Vector 2 it's just generic sci-fi machinery, barely anything changes apart from the background. And remember when I said how it can be frustrating? Well, it actually ties in with players commenting that the game is much harder than the original. It could be because there's a lot of new obstacles, but in my opinion it's probably harder because the obstacles just blend into the environment.
What is that, a woodpecker?
It only really gets different when they introduce the bees at floor 18. Lore-wise, the bees, or more specifically called wasps, are a failed experiment of nanobots that have gone rogue and pursue any person that ventures too far into the facility. Otherwise, they are just replacement for the guards. Once you get past floor 35, it just becomes an endless runner. The reason was because at this point, Nekki had already given up on the game. It didn't bring in that many players, it had low reviews, and they were already starting to work on Shadow Fight 3, which was far more popular than Vector. So the developers had to make a choice, and the choice was clear. It was actually so bad that even on Nekki's official website, they don't even bother showing Vector 2. Even Shadow Fight 2, which is much older, is still on their website. Lastly, to add insult to injury, after it got trashed, the original Vector had gotten a remaster and it was a success, keeping the same old charm while successfully updating the visuals and adding new features like characters. In the end, Vector 2 is the prime example of how too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Sure, it had more features than the original, but it made it too complicated and dragged out. It had the same realistic animations, but now in a world where we have VR and games looking as HD as this, that kind of thing wasn't rare anymore. Vector 1 was an amazing game. Vector 2 was a chore. Thanks thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know that there are some of you that actually like Vector 2, and I'm not going to stop you from liking it. I'm just throwing in my 2 cents into what possibly led to it being removed. And it's a shame, because I love the Vector series and I wish they could have done more for its sequel, but with how the original got a remaster, perhaps Vector 2 could return in the future. In the meantime, I might try out Vector 2. While it's no longer available, you can always emulate it, and so if it's really as good as some people say, I might make another review on it with a different perspective. I also might try to cover the Vector remaster in a future video, and also one related to Vector 2's Floor 35, as there's some potential for a cool story behind it. So if you want to see more videos like that, please leave a like and subscribe. And if you really want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member. And until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.